Good evening, I'm Amna Nawaz.
And I'm Jeff Bennett. On the NewsHour tonight, multiple people are killed in a mass shooting at a Christian school in Wisconsin, adding yet another community to the list of those roiled by gun violence.
We report from the Syrian town where the uprising that toppled the Assad regime began, as that nation charts a new path.
And in his first news conference since the election, President-elect Donald Trump details more of his agenda and defends a lawsuit that could have widespread implications for press freedom.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions, and friends of the NewsHour, including Leonard and Norma Chlorfine and the Judy and Peter Bloom Kovler Foundation. The William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, for more than 50 years advancing ideas and supporting institutions to promote a better world, at hewlett.org. And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the NewsHour. At least 2 people were killed and 6 others were injured at a private school in Madison, Wisconsin this morning.
The suspected shooter was also found dead at the scene. Officials told the Associated Press she was a 17-year-old female student at the school. Authorities are now investigating her motive, and another American community is reeling from mass gun violence. In a tragic scene far too familiar in America, police this morning rushed to respond to reports of an active shooter, this time at the Abundant Life Christian School in Madison, Wisconsin. Police say a teacher and a teenage student were killed. 2 other students were in critical condition this evening. Madison Police Chief Sean Barnes.
To be honest with you, I'm feeling a little dismayed now. So close to Christmas. Every child, every person in that building is a victim and will be a victim forever. And these types of trauma don't just go away. And we need to figure out and try to piece together what exactly happened. Right now, my heart is heavy for my community.
Officers say the shooter, who they also confirmed is dead, was a teenage student at the school, a small private institution in a residential Madison neighborhood, serving 390 students from kindergarten through 12th grade. Chief Barnes said that officers did not fire their weapons today and found the suspect, who used a handgun in the attack, dead inside the school building when they entered. A motive is still unknown. This year alone, across the U.S., more than 150 people were killed or wounded in at least 83 school shootings, according to CNN. At a reunification center set up by police, students' families gathered for the latest updates.
I had to get here as soon as possible.
Bethany Hyman's daughter attends Abundant Life Christian School.
I bring my daughter to school knowing well that this happens in the world, that people are struggling, and I pray for my daughter's safety.
I hoped that this day would never come in Madison.
This afternoon, Madison Mayor Satya Rhodes Conwayer delivered this plea to the rest of the country as her city becomes part of a growing list that no community wants to be a part of.
It is not something that any mayor, any fire chief, any police chief, any person in public office ever wants to have to deal with. And so I will ask our entire community and our entire country to do whatever we can to make sure that no public official ever has to stand in this position again.
We We start the day's other headlines in the French territory of Mayotte, where officials say the worst storm in almost a century has devastated the archipelago. The main airport and hospital were damaged, and access to food and water are limited. French President Emmanuel Macron said he will declare a national mourning period and will visit Mayotte soon. William Brangham has this report.
As Cyclone Chido thundered across Mayotte on Sunday, locals cowered in fear. The eye of the storm took a direct route over the two tiny islands between Mozambique and Madagascar.
It was the wind blowing, and I was panicked. I was screaming because I thought it would be the end for me.
John Bellows took this video after surviving the storm. The official death toll is only about a dozen so far, but officials fear hundreds or even thousands might be found dead as the storm clears and relief and recovery efforts begin. Nearly 320,000 people live in the densely populated 144 square miles of Mayotte. The French military has a large presence on nearby Reunion Island, another French territory. Soldiers and aid teams deployed from Reunion, while the French Interior Minister made his way to Mayotte to rally relief workers.
There are still mountains to move, so everyone needs to mobilize. Everyone needs to be at their post and be professional. No panicking, no rushing.
On Reunion, Arnaud Darnilala was still waiting to hear if his brother and other family members in Mayotte made it safely through the storm.
When you see houses destroyed, you also see a lot of dead people, so it could be a member of our family. So yes, we're worried about them.
Mayotte is the poorest French territory and the poorest place in the European Union. In Brussels today, the French foreign minister said he would be asking for help from the EU to rebuild.
All my thoughts this morning are with our compatriots in Mayotte, who are suffering the tragic consequences of the disaster. The government and state services are fully mobilized to provide support, reinforcement, and security.
For the PBS NewsHour, I'm William Brangham.
Also today, health officials in Gaza say that more than 45,000 Palestinians have now been killed since the start of the Israel-Hamas war. Family members held funerals today for some of the 13 people killed in an Israeli airstrike on a school-turned-shelter in Khan Yunis. Hospital officials say that 6 children were among the dead. Israel claims that Hamas fighters were using the shelter as a command center. Across Gaza, Palestinian civilians lamented the death and suffering caused by more than 14 months of war.
We have nothing to do with everything that is happening to us. We did not do any wrong in order for this to happen. Innocent people die who aren't connected to what is happening. Children, women, babies. A boy is born, and 2 or 3 days later, we find him as a victim.
Gaza's health ministry says the real death toll may be higher than 45,000 because bodies are trapped in places that medics cannot access. It does not distinguish between militants and civilians in its count. Separately, Israel's defense minister said today that negotiators are closer to a ceasefire deal now than at any time since a temporary ceasefire took effect in November of last year. Ukrainian and U.S. military officials say some North Korean troops were killed or wounded while fighting alongside Russian forces this weekend. They are the first reported casualties since as many as 12,000 North Korean troops joined Russia's war effort in recent weeks. Ukraine's military intelligence agency says 30 North Korean troops were killed or wounded in the Kursk border region where Russia has tried for months to repel a Ukrainian incursion. The White House also cited casualties, saying that North Korean troops are now on the front lines of the war. In Canada, the country's finance minister is resigning from the cabinet, raising more questions about the political future of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Chrystia Freeland cited differences with Trudeau over how to confront Donald Trump's threat of tariffs as a reason for her departure. Freeland also served as deputy prime minister and had long been one of Trudeau's most powerful and loyal allies. Her sudden departure further isolates Trudeau, who is facing calls from within his own party not to seek a 4th term. Trudeau says he plans to stay in his role into the next election, which must be held before October. Here at home, New Jersey's governor says that drone detectors have found, quote, little or no evidence of anything dangerous or threatening from a series of suspected drones spotted in the skies above his state. Phil Murphy also called for Congress to give local officials more authority to deal with the drones. They were first spotted in mid-November and have sparked growing fascination and frustration ever since. Over the weekend, sightings at an Air Force base near Dayton, Ohio, forced officials there to temporarily shut down the airspace. And in Boston, city police arrested 2 men accused of operating a drone dangerously close to Logan Airport. Yesterday, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer urged the government to deploy better technology to track and identify the drones.
It's not a bird, it's not a plane, it's a drone. And when it comes to drones, people in the New York area and all across the country have more questions than answers.
National security officials have stressed that the drones do not pose a threat to public safety, nor do they appear to be signs of foreign interference. A former FBI informant has pleaded guilty to lying about a bribery scheme involving Joe Biden and his son, Hunter. Alexander Smirnov admitted to a felony charge related to the made-up story, as well as tax evasion stemming from a separate indictment. Smirnov had told his FBI handler in 2020 that the Bidens had received $5 million each from executives at the Ukrainian energy company Burisma back in 2015. That false story was central to a Republican impeachment inquiry in Congress. Smirnov faces up to 6 years in prison. He'll be sentenced next month. Former TV host Carlos Watson has been sentenced to nearly 10 years in prison over charges related to his failed startup, Ozy Media. The 55-year-old was convicted last summer of conspiracy and aggravated identity theft charges. Prosecutors had accused Watson of playing a leading role in trying to deceive Ozy investors and lenders by inflating revenue numbers and hyping up deals that were not finalized or even real. Watson has denied any wrongdoing and has challenged his conviction. On Wall Street today, stocks ended mixed to start the week. The Dow Jones Industrial Average slipped more than 100 points, or 0.25%. The Nasdaq jumped to a new record, closing well above the 20,000-point level. The S&P 500 also ended higher on the day. And Zakir Hussain, one of India's most revered classical musicians, has died. Hussain is credited with introducing the tabla to the world, elevating the hand drums from an accompaniment to a globally celebrated solo sound. Over a career spanning 6 decades, he collaborated with music legends, including former Beatle George Harrison, drummer Mickey Hart, and cellist Yo-Yo Ma. Just this year, he became the first musician from India to win 3 Grammy Awards in the same year. Hussain passed away Sunday in San Francisco after a battle with chronic lung disease. He was 73 years old. And still to come on the NewsHour, how CEOs of many major corporations are trying to curry favor with the incoming Trump administration. Tamara Keith and Amy Walter break down the latest political headlines. And Arizona farmers are forced to adapt their agricultural practices because their main water source is drying up.
This is the PBS NewsHour from the David M. Rubenstein Studio at WETA in Washington, and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
For the first time since he fled the country, he had ruled with an iron fist and a willingness to kill his own people to stay in power. Former Syrian President Bashar al-Assad was heard from today. In a statement from exile in Moscow, Assad said, quote, at no point did he consider stepping down or seeking refuge, but said he was evacuated from Syria by Russian forces after he left Damascus for his family's hometown near Syria's coast.
Assad also said that the country has, in his words, fallen into the hands of terrorism. That's a reference to the forces that led the Lightning campaign that marked a new chapter in Syria's rebellion and now apparently leads that devastated nation. But the seeds of that revolution were sown just to the south of Damascus in the city of Deraa by students and young people back in 2011 as the Arab Spring took hold across the Middle East. Special correspondent Simona Foltine reports now on how the city that fostered uprising now celebrates the deposing of a dictator.
This is where it all began, the writing on the wall that sparked a revolution. In early 2011, Muawiyah Sayasne, then a 15-year-old student, scribbled a prophecy on the walls of his school in the southern city of Daraa.
The first wall we wrote on was here. We wrote "Down with the regime" and "Freedom." And on that wall over there, we wrote, "It's your turn, doctor."
The title doctor referred to Assad, an ophthalmologist. The graffiti, sprayed on both the school's inner and outer walls, was an unimaginable act of protest in Assad's repressive Syria.
When we were little, our parents used to tell us, "Don't speak about politics. The walls have ears."
But Muawiyah and his friends had been inspired by the Arab Spring. Strongmen had already fallen in Egypt and Tunisia. Little did they know that they'd be the ones to predict, albeit much later, Assad's overthrow.
We didn't think it would lead to this. We were watching the protests in Tunisia, the freedom that the regime had fallen. So we wrote, "It's your turn, doctor," on our school walls, but we didn't expect it to erupt this way.
The graffiti was quickly erased by authorities, the pupils arrested and tortured.
I was in prison for 45 days. There were a lot of different types of torture, beating, electrocution, any kind of abuse you can think of. We were tortured a lot.
It was the government's cruel treatment that fueled the anger across Syria, exploding into calls for systemic change. After his release, Muawiyah went on to join the armed opposition.
We want security and safety to return to Syria, and that we rebuild it with our hands. We defended our land, our country, our honor for 14 years, and thank God, we remained steadfast and prevailed.
Now, students in Daraa can flood the streets without fear of arrest and torture. The city of Daraa is where the Syrian uprising began, and today people are once again protesting, but not against the new government. They're enjoying their newly found freedom of expression, and they're celebrating the overthrow of Bashar al-Assad's regime.
This is a protest of victory. We got rid of the tyranny of Bashar al-Assad, the pig. Thank God we got rid of him, and life has returned. And God willing, Syria will be rebuilt.
For the first time in their lives, they can stand freely in their squares and raise their voices.
Now life is great. Before you'd go to Damascus, you were afraid. You'd go to Daraa, you were afraid. Our country was condemned. Now we can go anywhere we want.
And that's exactly what they do. Public squares are brimming with all that was suppressed for decades. The voice of justice getting louder as they chant. Many approached us, wanting their opinions heard, keen to speak for the first time with Western television. Mohammed is an economics student at the university here. He looks forward to finally leading a normal student life.
Our ambition was to wield a degree, that our weapons would be knowledge and the pen. We didn't want to bear arms and fight, but this regime forced us to do that by arresting and killing innocent people and children.
In the mosque from where the first protest emerged in 2011, rebel leaders gather for a prayer. Yassin al-Nassan is a commander in one of the many rebel factions that emerged to fight Assad's brutal crackdown. He has just returned from Idlib, after years of exile from Daraa.
We went to Idlib after big pressure on us to evict us from this land. We wouldn't have left otherwise, but we started to organize ourselves and to prepare ourselves for the return to our land.
Yassin al-Nassan left Daraa in 2018 as part of an ultimatum: stay and lay down your arms, or transfer to the northern province of Idlib. What may have looked like a defeat at that time became an opportunity that paved the road to victory. The factions united under the leadership of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS, the leading armed opposition group that controlled Idlib before it launched its surprise offensive earlier this month.
The offensive was a surprise for others, but not for us in the north. We were waiting for it to start, but we chose the right time.
Now, all the factions will become part of the Ministry of Defense.
There are no more factions. There will be a proper organized army which will incorporate those who volunteered to defend this country, and we will finish with the factionalism and chaos.
Indeed, the power struggles that weakened the opposition in the past appear to have diminished. Inside the city's main government complex, fighters from the south and north mingle with one another.
Yesterday, the guys from the north came and we merged with them, and now we work together.
Anas Al-Mohammed is from Daraa and the commander in another rebel group. He appears to recognize the leadership of HTS.
We tried many times to overthrow the government, but we didn't have the capabilities here, neither the weaponry nor the organizational capabilities, so that we could achieve what our brothers and sisters achieved in the north. Our people in the north had enough time to train and prepare for this powerful work.
It remains to be seen how long this unity will last. But in Daraa, where the uprising began almost 14 years ago, there's a firm desire to put down the guns for good. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Simona Foltin in Daraa, Syria.
Now from the far south of Syria to Aleppo in the north, where we find our special correspondent Layla Molana Allen tonight. She and her team also spent time in Latakia on the coast earlier today. So Layla, as we heard from ousted President Bashar al-Assad for the first time today, tell us more about what exactly he had to say.
So indeed, this was the first time that anyone in Syria has heard from him since, as everyone thought, he fled on the 7th of December when it became clear that rebels were about to take Damascus. Everyone thought that he got on a plane to Moscow with his family, but he has released a statement today claiming that actually he went north to Latakia, that's the Alawite heartland, the sect that the Assad family is from, and went to a Russian base called Hmeimim with his allies there, hoping to regroup and firm up those lines with the Syrian armed forces. But he says when it became clear that all the armed forces had laid down their weapons and the rebels were taking the entire area, the Russians evacuated him out on the Sunday. Now, he says that he never had any intention to flee his country, that he's always supported his country and never sold it out, and that he only went to Russia because it became clear that nothing more could be done, and terrorism, as he calls it, these rebels had taken over the whole country. Now, he closes by saying that he doesn't, it seems, plan to come back because once terrorism has taken over a country, there is no place for leaders there, but that he hopes that one day Syria will be free and independent again from these rebels. Of course, many people in Syria would say that for the first time in more than half a century, Syria is free and independent of the Assads now.
And Layla, tell us more about that Alawite heartland in which you spent time today, where the Assad family is from and where, as you say, he passed through as he fled Damascus on his way to Moscow. What did people there tell you about how they view the fall of the Assad regime?
So Latakia is this area on the coast between Latakia and Tartus. There are multiple Russian bases. So it's an area where the Russians have reinforced and, of course, supported the Assad family and the regime for many years now. It's also where the Assad family comes from. They come from a little village called Kardaha. And we went there today in Latakia district. And in fact, people there weren't mourning the family at all. The tomb of Bashar al-Assad's father, Hafez, has been burnt to the ground and it's covered in graffiti from rebel fighters. And there were people asset stripping the Assad's family house, simply taking what they had to get them through the winter. Because what people there say is, we are incredibly poor. The Alawite minority that he says he supported, actually, other than his immediate family and supporters, he left us all to rot here. Incredible poverty that we saw. He put us against the other Syrian people so we couldn't support them, and said that the Sunnis would come and kill us like ISIS had, and yet actually he did nothing for us, and we're glad to be rid of him, and we want Syria to be reunited again.
Meanwhile, the Sunni rebels who overthrew the Assad regime now have to set up a government, actually run a country. How is that process going, Layla?
So this is the big question, of course, because what's happened is this incredible rebel sweep through the country, but they don't have that much manpower. Part of why they were so successful is because, essentially, the Syrian regime forces laid down their weapons. Many of them were conscripts who didn't want to fight in the first place and couldn't stand up against these rebels, but they swept down. They don't have enough manpower right now to run the whole country, to man the whole country. So they're going to have to make decisions pretty quickly about whether they're going to bring other groups on board, potentially bring former soldiers on board, potentially work with the Kurds in the northeast. We are starting to see a little bit more organisation. When we came through the border from Lebanon a week ago, there wasn't a soul on the Syrian side. HTS has now said that from tomorrow morning, all the borders with Turkey, Jordan and Lebanon will be closed on the Syrian side until they've managed to make some sort of organisation to have visa stamps again, to have people manning those borders. We're also starting to see more checkpoints popping up now, where people are searching cars. These fighters are allowing people through quite freely, but they are checking who is travelling. And one of the reasons, of course, is they're trying to apprehend apprehend people from the Assad regime's time who are responsible for crimes against the Syrian people. And that question of justice is going to come in pretty soon. How will justice be administered? We've seen a couple of administrators from the regime tackled and dragged through the streets with violent treatment. Ayatollah Tahrir al-Sham saying, we don't want that, we want proper justice here. And just a few little concerns starting to pop up about this liberalisation agenda. People not sure if it's really true. Some women starting to report problems. Some female judges saying they've been told by fighters they won't be allowed to keep serving. Now, that could be individual fighters, but pretty soon the commander of HTS, Ahmad al-Shara, who has renamed himself from his former jihadi name, is going to have to make some decisions about how he's going to institute discipline among these fighters if they're going to properly organise the country.
Special correspondent Layla Molana Allen reporting from Aleppo, Syria tonight. Layla, thank you. Today, at his first news conference since winning the 2024 election, President-elect Donald Trump spoke about a number of his policy priorities and answered questions on a wide range of issues.
Despite the potential U.S. ban of TikTok next month, Mr. Trump said he had what he called a warm spot in his heart for the popular social media app. That's after winning a larger share of Gen Z voters than he expected in this year's election. And that's as the Chinese-owned app asked the Supreme Court today to block that law that could result in a U.S. ban.
When it came to foreign policy, Mr. Trump declined to say whether he'd spoken with Russian President Vladimir Putin since the election. But he did reiterate his goal to end the war in Ukraine as quickly as possible, adding that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky should be prepared to make a deal.
And he criticized the Biden administration's recent decision to allow Ukraine to fire U.S.-supplied long-range missiles into Russia.
I don't think they should have allowed missiles to be shot 200 miles into Russia. I think that was a bad thing. I don't think that should have been allowed. Not when there's a possibility, and certainly not just weeks before I take over. Why would they do that without asking me what I thought? I wouldn't have had them do that. I think that was a big mistake they made.
Mr. Trump also weighed in on a defamation lawsuit he settled with ABC News for $15 million. The suit followed an ABC segment earlier this year in which George Stephanopoulos said Mr. Trump had been found civilly liable for raping writer E. Jean Carroll. A New York jury found him liable for sexual abuse.
The $15 million will be contributed to Trump's future presidential foundation and museum. Mr. Trump was asked about the settlement and whether he plans to file similar suits against other news outlets or individuals.
I think you have to do it because they're very dishonest. And you need a fair press. And the press is, no, I see others. I have a few others that I'm doing. I'm going to, as an example, I'm doing this not because I want to. I'm doing this because I feel I have an obligation.
Following this all closely is New York Times reporter David Enrich, whose upcoming book, Murder the Truth, explores challenges to press freedoms. David, welcome to the NewsHour. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start with that ABC News settlement. They're paying $15 million in that settlement, plus $1 million for Mr. Trump's legal fees. They also added an editor's note on the interview page website. It reads thusly: ABC News and George Stephanopoulos regret statements regarding President Donald J. Trump made during an interview by George Stephanopoulos with Representative Nancy Mace on ABC's This Week on March 10th of 2024. David, how strong a case did Mr. Trump have in this lawsuit, and how usual is a lawsuit like this in the first place?
Well, lawsuits like this have become increasingly common, and this is a tactic that Trump decades ago began pioneering, and he has just been banging this drum more and more loudly ever since. And it's a tactic that's caught on, especially in MAGA circles, but really in politicians, business leaders, companies, big organizations are increasingly using defamation threats and defamation lawsuits as kind of a cudgel to attack unfavorable news coverage. And the reality in this case is that, according to everyone I've spoken to, Trump's case against ABC News seemed not great. And there are very strong protections built into the First Amendment and how it's interpreted by the Supreme Court that give the media and others a lot of leeway when they are scrutinizing powerful individuals, no more so than the president-elect of the United States. And it's basically meant to prevent exactly this type of lawsuit. So I think ABC had a pretty good chance of prevailing in court if they had wanted to let it go that far.
My understanding is the bar for defamation in particular is high for public figures. So what do we know about why ABC did decide to settle?
That is a very good $15 million question right now. And it seems like, based on the reporting we've done and just talking to people, it seems like they were just very reluctant to have a long legal battle with the president of the United States, which is understandable, right? But it also sets a precedent potentially that it really could embolden other political leaders, including Trump himself, to really double down on this tactic. So I think there are a lot of people in the First Amendment community and certainly in the media that were very surprised and quite troubled by this decision to essentially concede this to Trump so early on in what could have been a years-long legal fight.
You also heard there Mr. Trump saying today that he might go after other platforms, other individuals, including social media influencers in the same way, not just journalists, so suggesting a much broader use of these kinds of lawsuits. What's the potential impact of that kind of statement?
Well, I think it potentially sends a really chilling message to anyone who wants to not only scrutinize or criticize the president, but really anyone else who is influenced by Trump. I mean, already we have seen in the past couple of years a real explosion in the use of legal threats and lawsuits against not just journalists, but everyone. And it's not just people on the right going after people on the left. This is at times a bipartisan trend where litigation is seen as a solution to shut people up. And I think that's something that we are unfortunately probably going to see a lot more of in the years ahead. And it's not something that is just the mainstream media that's going to be affected by it potentially. I mean, there's, as Trump said today, it's possible he would go after people with huge followings on social media or on YouTube, things like that. So I think it's potentially, the ramifications of this are possibly quite broad.
Well, specific to news organizations, we should note that Mr. Trump has another pending lawsuit against CBS News' 60 Minutes. He said today that he might think about suing the Des Moines Register as well. Is there legal precedent that we should be thinking about or considering for how these kinds of cases might be handled?
Well, the most important legal precedent is a Supreme Court case from 60 years ago, New York Times versus Sullivan, which basically created a very high threshold for public figures like Trump to prevail in defamation cases. The problem is that, or maybe not the problem, but the fact of the matter is that in recent years, Trump and many of his allies, including 2 Supreme Court justices, have expressed a willingness, if not a desire, to reconsider that 1964 decision. And so that really, there's the possibility here that not only will Trump and his allies start bringing more and more of these cases, but that some of the historical protections against these cases having a chilling effect are going to start being chipped away at by federal courts.
That is David Enrich of the New York Times, author of the book, Murder, the Truth. David, thank you for your time. Really good to talk to you.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
During his press conference today, President-elect Trump also discussed how CEOs and business leaders from Wall Street to Silicon Valley are rushing to meet with him and build personal relationships in the weeks before his inauguration. Mr. Trump took note of just how different a tone it has been compared to 2016.
The first term, everybody was fighting me. In this term, everybody wants to be my friend. People want to get along with me this time. Well, they've gone through 4 years, and, it wasn't easy for me, but it wasn't easy for them either. And that's a great thing, though. Getting along is a great thing.
To break down why, we're joined now by Brian Schwartz, White House economic policy reporter at The Wall Street Journal. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
So you actually wrote about this for The Wall Street Journal in a piece with the headline, "The Weak CEOs Bent the Knee to Trump." Whether it's Apple CEO Tim Cook, Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook, Amazon's Jeff Bezos, what are these CEOs hoping to gain or perhaps trying to prevent?
Well, it's those few and many more have been reaching out and engaging with Donald Trump since his Election Day victory, along with his advisors, right? And, most of it feels like this kind of first move to cozy up to Trump as he prepares to be sworn in as president. But when you talk to people privately about this, many executives have concerns over Trump's proposed tariff policies. He's been talking about that throughout the campaign. He talked about that at the press conference today. And it's this idea that he's going to slap tariffs on goods coming from China, possibly from Mexico and Canada. And keep in mind, many of these CEOs either do business in China or they know people or are close to business leaders who do. And I think that's pretty notable. So my sense on this is just the beginning of kind of an engagement with Trump directly, not necessarily entirely with his advisors, but there are some meetings going on with his advisors as well to start the process of trying to push back on some of these tariffs that are likely to come.
What is fundamentally different about this kind of outreach that we're seeing now, these CEOs to Donald Trump, as compared to CEOs with presidents past?
Well, you could compare it directly with President Joe Biden. You just didn't see this. I mean, I'll just be very clear about it. Yeah, he had various meetings that were all out in the open with CEOs, you name them, Jamie Dimon, and big bank CEOs would meet with Joe Biden, and all that's out there. But they did not have this much of a close relationship with the president. It just didn't happen that way. And with Donald Trump, that's been a different story since 2016. These executives have had direct access at times to the White House. You mentioned somebody like Tim Cook. I mean, after the first election in 2016, Cook was in regular contact with Trump. Yeah, the same thing now recently, we reported with Jeff Bezos. He's been in contact with Trump and people close to him like Jared Kushner. So the reality is this type of system was just not in place with Joe Biden, and it is with Trump as he starts to head toward the White House.
And your recent reporting looks at the limits to that kind of influence. Tell me more about that.
Well, when you look at the tariff situation, for instance, there's been for weeks this effort to try to talk with Trump or talk with Trump's team on how to kind of maneuver the president-elect when it comes to tariffs. And the message from advisors to corporate leaders or their consultants has been really clear. Right now, as of today, Trump's not getting off this track of using tariffs, at least from a negotiating or a threat perspective, right? We don't know exactly if he's going to follow through with every single tariff threat that he's put out there. But Trump and his team have made it extremely clear that right now, tariffs are going to be some form of a policy tool in this next administration. And for corporate leaders, that could be a problem, because if you're looking for some sort of exemption from these tariffs, and there were exemptions in Trump 1.0 for certain companies, there are still question marks as to exactly how you're going to approach this administration and make the impact that you're looking to have when it comes to avoiding the impact of those tariffs.
And Brian, the president-elect has also vowed to expedite federal permitting for companies that invest at least $1 billion in the U.S. And today he announced the Japanese company SoftBank was making a $100 billion investment in a number of U.S. projects. What are the implications and possible complications of an approach like that?
Yeah, listen, I saw that and I was surprised when I saw him put that out on Truth Social, because it seems like that would have to be a move that it would have to be approved by Congress. I understand Republicans control Congress, but that would have to shift the type of approval process we're alluding to here to a degree that I don't think can be done by purely executive order. And it's interesting. You know, we have some reporting where Doug Burgum, who's very close to a bunch of oil CEOs, and he's the nominee to be Interior Secretary, when he saw that while with his team, he privately acknowledged that he was really impressed with that decision. And I think in that announcement, but it is still questions as to whether Trump is going to be able to move ahead with this and enact such a change to the approval process, particularly around land grants and around oil and energy regulations surrounding those types of decisions.
Yeah, advocacy groups see this as making an end run around environmental protections. Brian Schwartz of the Wall Street Journal, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.
With 5 weeks until the inauguration, Donald Trump's cabinet picks have been meeting with senators on Capitol Hill, and his team has been preparing Mr. Trump's Day One agenda. For more on that, we turn now to our Politics Monday duo. That is Amy Walter of the Cook Political Report with Amy Walter and Tamara Keith of NPR. It's good to see you both.
Good to be here.
So Mr. Trump's nominees have been on Capitol Hill trying to woo senators. RFK Jr. was there today, in fact. And as that was happening, President-elect Trump was in Mar-a-Lago speaking to reporters, and he said that he believes RFK Jr., if he's confirmed, will be much less radical than you would think. We will, I guess, see about that. But Tam, bring us up to speed on where these nominees stand, both in the perspective of the Trump transition and the Republican senators that they've been meeting with.
Right, so these nominees have been making the rounds. It's very standard. Like, some things are very normal, and making the rounds, going around to different senators, trying to answer their concerns is a thing that happens every time there's a new nominee. What is different is that senators, Republican senators, do have concerns with some of these nominees. They aren't necessarily voicing them publicly as much as perhaps you might think, in part because there's not a lot to be gained from that. And so they are talking a lot about wanting these nominees to have a fair hearing. And, you know, having a confirmation hearing, having a fair hearing. I think that what we don't know yet is, what are those hearings going to be like? And are any of these candidates going to take all of these questions that they're getting and realize, oh, this is all going to be out in public later? And, you know, I think by and large, we expect Trump is going to get the cabinet that he wants, but maybe not the entire cabinet that he wants. And someone like RFK Jr. is a really interesting case because he is pro-choice. And that is something that Republicans could have concerns with. We haven't seen a massive lobbying effort on that yet from conservative groups, but it could happen. We definitely saw Mitch McConnell come out and say, polio is real and the polio vaccine saves lives. So you're seeing just hints of pushback.
And Amy, there's this question, you know, what do the American people make of all of this? And there's a new AP-NORC poll that shows 55% of those polled lack confidence in Donald Trump's ability to assemble a qualified cabinet. Just 27% of the public are extremely or very confident in Donald Trump's ability to appoint well-qualified individuals to his cabinet and other high-level positions, which is fairly remarkable. The same voting public that delivered him the Electoral College and the popular vote then turns around and says we have no confidence in his ability to put together a well-qualified cabinet. What is that about?
Yeah, so I do think we have to be careful in the wording sometimes of polling. And what I also like to do is go back and look at time series of polls. So CNN came out with their poll asking a similar question, but phrasing it maybe a little bit differently, basically just saying, do you approve or disapprove of the way that they're handling the transition? And they have these numbers going all the way back to Bill Clinton in 1992. A couple of things that you can see. The first is his approval of how he's handling it is much lower than any other president who has come in their first term. Now, this is odd because it's his first term. It's not his first term, right? So non-consecutive terms, we don't have any history with that. So we've seen people like, for example, Barack Obama coming in with an approval in the 80s in terms of how he's handling his transition. What is different, though, from the first Trump 1.0, is that he's getting much higher marks this time around. So right after the election in 2017, he was only getting 46% approving. By the time we got to January, only 40% approved. Right now, he's at 55% approved, 45% disapprove. And I think a lot of it is based on what Tam just said, which is it feels very normal. It didn't feel normal in 2017. Nothing was normal in 2017. So the sort of rolling this out, it looks very familiar. And I also think Tam's exactly right, is that while there seems to be some cushion here for Donald Trump, and the focus has been all on Republicans, who's going to say yes? Are these folks going to get through? I think we have to remember that we have no idea how voters are going to react once they see these people themselves. Once Democrats, remember, right now they're just meeting with the Republicans. When Democrats get to ask questions too, and the response of voters to like, oh, I didn't really know about a lot of this, that's going to be critically important.
Tam, I heard you reporting on NPR last week about the differences between Trump 1.0 and Trump 2.0, let's call it, the first administration and this second one as it takes shape. What are the fundamental differences in how he and his team are approaching this administration?
The first time around, they were really, in a lot of ways, flying by the seat of their pants. They were figuring it out as they went. They didn't know, where the light switches were in the White House. I mean, that's not exactly right, but they they were figuring it out. It took about a week until they came out with the ban, the first effort at a travel ban, keeping President Trump's promise, a travel ban for people from 7 Muslim-majority countries. It was immediate chaos at the airports. Department of Homeland Security officials didn't know what they were supposed to be enforcing. It took effect immediately, the executive order. Lawyers at the government didn't know what they were defending. And ultimately, it was thrown out by the courts. It took almost 6 months to actually have that in place. Well, they've learned. They have spent the last 4 years, some of the people who will now be in this administration have spent the last 4 years planning for what they would do if they were back in the White House. And they have written executive orders. They know how to pull the levers of government in a way they didn't before. And I think Trump is also different. He's coming in more confident. He knows he doesn't have that much time. He's immediately a lame duck. He's not running again. So he has a narrow margin in the House and the Senate. He doesn't have much time, and they intend to, they talked about shock and awe last time. Now Stephen Miller, the he'll be an advisor, a deputy chief of staff, he's saying it will be like a bolt of lightning.
The fact that Donald Trump is a lame duck, how does that change the dynamic? And the fact that the American electorate is now used to him. He's a known quantity.
That's right. And that is a really important development, because we look to the first midterm election as a really good marker for, how is the public judging this new president? And it becomes important, too, because then that president readjusts kind of on the fly after the results of that election. If you're Donald Trump, like, whether Republicans gain or lose seats in the House and the Senate really isn't impacting your future legacy. What will influence his legacy is, I think, exactly right. What's going to happen in these first 2 years, and his ability. I think the thing that is more likely to get in his way than control of Congress or people, even within his own party, rejecting him, is the courts, because so many of these things are going to end up being handled by the courts.
Yeah, I mean, we could see him issue an executive order taking away birthright citizenship. Now, that's in the Constitution, but that doesn't mean that they won't try, they won't test it and try to get it to the courts. I mean, in fact, in many cases, the court is the goal.
Yeah. And there's also the question of job performance, right? And I raise that because Donald Trump gave an interview to Time magazine where he was talking about grocery prices. And he says, it's hard to bring things down once they're up. It's very hard. And we know he's attuned to this issue because here's what he told Meet the Press in an interview last Sunday.
I'm looking to bring prices down because, I won on two things, the border and more than immigration. They like to say immigration. I break it down more to the border, but I won on the border and I won on groceries. It's a very simple word, groceries.
And of course, when he was campaigning, he was basically saying, elect me and prices will come tumbling down. It's the difference between campaigning and now and governing. How might Democrats make this a liability for him?
Yeah, well, it's as the Biden administration learned and Democrats learned, the president doesn't have control over the price of stuff, and prices are not coming down. Even as inflation goes down, prices do not change. We're never going to go back to the 2020 cost of these grocery items. What we're already seeing, though, in the data is that Democrats are much more pessimistic about the economy, even though nothing has changed in the last month. Just looking at how they felt about the economy in October and now, Republicans much more optimistic. Where independents sit is going to be really critical to watch. Right now, they're a little more optimistic, but not as dramatically optimistic. I think if you're Democrats, the number one thing you're looking at is not just do the prices come down, but what's the priority for Republicans? The fact that legislatively, they've got these tax cuts. You have Donald Trump on record saying, yeah, we'll do more cuts for corporations and wealthy individuals. That's going to be a challenge for Republicans to message.
Amy Walter and Tamara Keith, thanks to you both as always.
Welcome.
Yuma County, Arizona is known as the winter salad bowl capital. From lettuce to cilantro to broccoli, the region produces almost all the leafy green vegetables consumed in the U.S. during winter months. But farmers there rely on the nearby Colorado River. And as the West contends with drought and a changing climate, they've had to adapt. Stephanie Sy has this report.
So I'm going to guess about 5 days ago.
Okay. On a crisp November morning, an introduction on how to grow vegetables in the Sonoran Desert.
So right now, we would be harvesting this crop at peak maturity probably next week.
Matt McGuire is the Chief Agricultural Officer for J.V. Smith, which grows vegetables on 8,500 acres in Yuma County, Arizona.
I'm standing in a field of lettuce, but I'm surrounded on all sides by desert. How does this make sense?
Very fertile soil. You got to remember this valley, Yuma Valley, Bard Winter Haven Valley, they're all formed by the river.
That's the Colorado River, which starts in the Rocky Mountains and once flowed so abundantly down to this region that it would occasionally flood.
So there's all these sediments from flooding over the years that built up these very rich soils here in this area.
That, plus the consistently mild, sunny winters in southern Arizona, have made lettuce growing a cash cow.
You can say, oh, I want to grow them all in Florida. Well, that's great. When they don't get hurricanes or excess rains or freeze, you have vegetables in the wintertime. There are other places that keep trying, but they cannot grow consistent quantities and quality of lettuce that the country needs. So if you want lettuces in the wintertime or broccoli in the wintertime, you got to come to the desert.
So these sprinklers are something we've started to implement over the last 2 years.
Farmer John Dinsmore says the winter climate, coupled with irrigation practices, produce a better harvest and a better yield.
Being able to have such consistent weather is really what allows us to micromanage our farming practices.
And by consistent weather, you mean it's sunny all the time.
We average just over 3 inches of rain a year. We don't have many clouds, but that consistent sunlight is what allows us to really be able to focus on our farming practices day by day.
But the climate is also what's creating problems for the farmers here. The Colorado River's major reservoirs, Lake Powell and Lake Mead, reached historic lows a few years ago. A multi-year drought continues to squeeze supply in the Southwest.
Scientists say that rising temperatures from man-made climate change have supercharged the drought in the West, causing the last 2 decades to be the driest in at least 1,200 years. At the same time, the average flows from the Colorado River, which these crops entirely rely on, are down by about 20%.
For several decades, farmers managed to get more so-called crop per drop. They're adopting newer technologies to try and stay ahead of the dwindling water supply.
If you look at the statistics, we've increased our production for the last 30 years. High density beds, different genetics, satellite driven laser level equipment, and we're now producing more crop per drop than anywhere in the U.S.
The law of the river governs how the Colorado's waters are allocated, with most of it going to agriculture. Farmers in Yuma have senior water rights, meaning if there were ever mandated cuts, they'd be among the last to be forced to comply. But the river is so depleted, even they are starting to worry. Paul Brierly is the head of Arizona's Agriculture Department.
Is there a sense that those rights are in peril, given?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of competition. And it's on a lot of different levels.
Scarcity has led to heated negotiations between states and tribes, between the upper and lower basin, and between growers and growing cities. The river is over-allocated.
If we had continued on that drought, there would have come a point where, the water availability on the river would have been so finite that it might have come down to a choice of, do we grow crops, or do we have to shuttle water off to the different cities that get Colorado River just to keep them alive.
Brierly says Yuma has long had a target on its back.
Yuma has some of the oldest and highest priorities on the Colorado River, yet they're at the end of the river, right? Like right over there, it goes into Mexico. So you can have the best rights in the world, but if the water's not flowing down to you, not a lot you can do. So,
you know, in 2022, when we really saw it get near Deadpool, was there panic in this area, and was that a wake-up call?
It was a wake-up call, not just to this area, to the whole regions. There was a call from the Bureau of Reclamation to possibly have to reduce water use by 20 to 40%, which is a huge thing. And so Yuma Agriculture got together and put together a plan trying to navigate to, and this is something I'm passionate about, is not have fallowing farmland, taking land out of production be the answer, but to be more efficient with water and continue producing food, because it's a national security to have our own food supply.
This past year's snows in the Rockies may have bought farmers some time, but John Dinsmore says he's not burying his head in the sand.
The science that leads us to these new practices is helpful, as well as the science that gives us a forecast of what the future might look like. It can be scary, but again, to be a farmer, you've got to have some hope.
They'll continue, he says, to take it season by season for as long as the winter salad bowl is on the menu. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Stephanie Tsai in Yuma, Arizona.
And that is the NewsHour for tonight. I'm Amna Nawaz.
And I'm Jeff Bennett. For all of us here at the PBS NewsHour, thanks for spending part of your evening with us.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by supported by the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, committed to building a more just, verdant, and peaceful world. More information at macfound.org. And with the ongoing support of these institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.